Hello, everybody, once again from his bedroom. It is I, Matt. You know me, I'm the other guy on the podcast. And so, Les did his video yesterday. I elected to do mine today, Monday, because we have the conference championship results and a couple more things to talk about. So, naturally, that's where we're going to start. And then, at the end, a special kind of rant segment for everybody. So, firstly, we have the AFC, where the Bengals, against what seemingly seemed to be all odds, got the biggest win probably, well, heck, in a long time, and are going to the Super Bowl, which seemed like a ludicrous sentence even after week one when I said this team has the ability to make the playoffs. I didn't think they would be Super Bowl good. I really didn't. And we're still debate about the offensive line and Jamar Chase pick for a while, especially if next year goes a little bit south, but it was just an amazing football game to watch. It was exciting. It was a long-suffering franchise exercising a lot of demons. And strangely enough, it was Patrick Mahomes looking human after looking like his normal inhuman self. And in my personal opinion, I would say that game totally turned on its head. At the same point everyone else does. That halftime goal line stand by Cincinnati to keep the Chiefs from getting another score on the board before. And only going down 21-3 instead of 28. And that makes a world of difference, of course, with the comeback. It makes things a little bit easier. And the next thing you know, the Bengals and their super rookie kicker have taken the lead, only for us to have that overtime discussion again. But this time, both teams got the ball, and it was amazing to watch the Bengals finally not do what we jokingly call bungling and actually get to the Super Bowl. And it's just amazing to see that. That was a great conference championship game. And really, those are my only thoughts, is that, like, the Chiefs kind of had an epic collapse, but it wasn't super laughable. They just kind of let it off. And the next thing you know, the Bengals are getting some decent breaks on balls defensively, and the entire tide of the game just changes. Now, there was, in the NFC game, where the Rams beat the 49ers, that game was a little bit more stagnant. And I don't know if it's just because I'm not as into the West Coast teams because I don't see them as much because of television and time zone concerns, but that game took a while to get me interested, and then it finally picked up in the fourth quarter, and it was a really fun game to watch. Matt Stafford is proving to everybody that even though he's come from a background of losing and, a team that wouldn't spend any money on him, now that he's on a team that's willing to spend and just throw money at him, that he's proved that he can come back into playoffs, and he's got the mental fortitude to do it. We called him a playoff loser, and he's totally reversed that narrative, and it's amazing to see. So now we have the Bengals and Rams in the big one, and that's a matchup I don't think a lot of people expected. Looking back on week one, I think we were all pretty high on Tampa Bay, Green Bay, the Bills, the Chiefs, and rightfully so. But there are a couple takeaways from mostly the AFC game that I want to talk about. And the first one is Kansas City the most undervalued, or are they the greatest dynasty to never become a dynasty? Because they've hosted 4 straight championship games in the AFC. That's great. They're 2-2 and 1-1 in the Super Bowl. And I look around and we saw that Buffalo is very capable of hanging around with them. We've seen the Bengals and Chiefs form a rivalry out of nowhere because now the Bengals have beaten them twice, and it's going to be interesting to see how that expands. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how Kansas City responds. They're going to be fine. Patrick Mahomes is still a really, really good quarterback. We can't say he's not. We know he's one of the best top 5 guys in the league at worst. But it's going to be interesting to see how the other aspects of that team adapt and respond to the new and upcoming threats, because you don't know who's coming into that division as well. You could have Deshaun Watson, you could have Russell Wilson, you may even have Aaron Rodgers coming over to the AFC and making things a lot tougher. And now you've just experienced what's coming with the Bengals and Josh Allen and 2 very good young quarterbacks. Which leads me to point number 2, which is, if you're Aaron Rodgers and you're the biggest free agent quarterback in the history of free agent quarterbacks, why do you want to come to the AFC? Why? You can come and you can be on Denver, and you can play Patrick Mahomes twice, Justin Herbert twice, and Derek Carr with Josh McDaniels as his coach twice. Oh, and as a reward, when you get to play the other divisions in your conference, you're going to have to play, let's say you play the AFC North, you've got Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, maybe Jimmy Garoppolo on the 49ers or Steelers. And that doesn't sound like fun in the regular season, and you got to go through the same guys in the playoffs? Why would you put yourself through that? Now let's go over to the NFC. With Tom Brady retiring, which who knows, he may retire, he may not retire. He may play another year out of spite to make Adam Schefter look silly. I don't know. But let's say he does retire. Let's say Russell Wilson demands a trade to New York. Who is going to stop you over there? The Rams are good, but the Rams have no money and they're old. And they're only going to get older. The Cardinals and the Cowboys, as good as they are, have a history of laying down in the playoffs via epic meltdowns, collapses, and memorable things that we always harp on when we talk about like their playoff failures. And you could go to a Tampa or a San Francisco and have a fairly easy ride to a 1 seed and an NFC Championship game. I know that you've had the history with the NFC Championship game, but why would you go to the AFC where it's going to be a battle every week with a really good player in the playoffs, or even in the regular season? But you could just go to a San Francisco or go to a Tampa Bay, who, in spite of losing Tom Brady, still has a very good offensive line, still has 2 tight ends who can do stuff with the football, and a pretty damn good defense. And they're in the worst division now. If Aaron Rodgers went to the NFC South right now, there's nobody in their right mind who would tell me he's not the best quarterback in the division, especially because 2 teams don't even have a quarterback. So I would definitely, if I'm Aaron Rodgers and I'm seeing the AFC take shape the way it is, and let's say you've got Deshaun Watson on the Dolphins, you've got Jimmy Garoppolo on the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team that's a lot like the 49ers, and he doesn't have to be special to win. Why would you do that to yourself? Why would you do that? Why would you go with Baltimore and the Titans and even the Colts, who, in spite of their quarterback issues, have a very complete roster, when you could just go and play the NFC South or the quarterbackless Seahawks, who are kind of spindling out of control? Why would you leave that? And I'm not, especially when you could. I know your guys in Denver, but if there's anything we learned from that AFC title game, it's that coaching isn't everything. Which brings me to the next point, which is that when Patrick Mahomes burst on the scene, we were all like, "Oh, Andy Reid! Thank God for Andy Reid. We love Andy Reid." I don't get that with Zach Taylor, and I don't really think he's super deserving of it. I totally get it. This seems to be Joe Burrow taking the entire chip on his shoulder. And not just the entire, just like a chip, the entire bag of chips on his shoulder. And leading the Bengals to some place they haven't been in a very long time. I got to give credit to Jamar Chase too, but it's weird to see a guy like Joe Burrow just come out, take the whole entire team on his back. And, nobody's praising the coaching. Nobody's like, oh, Zach Taylor had a great game plan for Patrick Mahomes. No one's saying that. I think it's mostly just we have a guy in Joe Burrow who's got just pure raw talent that's trying to use sheer will of force to get his team to a championship. And whether or not that will happen, we got to wait 2 weeks to see, because the offensive line issues are really going to show off when they play the Rams, due to 2 guys named Von Miller, who's won a Super Bowl MVP, MVP4, and Aaron Donald, who's looking to get ring number 1. That's the one thing he doesn't have. That is the one thing in his Hall of Fame career he doesn't have yet, and that's a ring, and he wants one very badly. And the Bengals, they already lost their tight end tragically. I mean, that injury looked brutal for Uzama. I feel for him. The Rams also ironically lost their tight end, Tyler Higbee. He's probably not going to play in the Super Bowl. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. I think this game is going to be very fun to watch. Right now, if you ask me, I would definitely say Los Angeles, just because I think they have a lot of defensive guys who are going to make the Bengals offensive personnel's life a living hell. But I thought that about the Chiefs too, and look what happened. So, it's a great Super Bowl. There's going to be a lot of narratives. We're seeing the structure of the AFC get even tougher, and we haven't even hit the offseason transactions yet. It's going to be a wild ride, and the Bengals, from out of nowhere, have catapulted themselves into the conversation as a possible team that could take on the Kansas City Chiefs and make it to another Super Bowl if they wanted. And I think that's great for the league. It's great for the NFL. It's great for everybody. So I am not depressed at all. We are not getting the Rams-Chiefs Super Bowl we all wanted, or it seemed like we all wanted. I think it's going to be great. I think Joe Burrow is going to become an MVP candidate overnight. He was already almost there this year. He's heading there next year. And it's going to be interesting to see how the Bengals adapt to the success. The Rams, we kind of expected to be good. We knew the Rams were going to be good. There was too much money in that team to be poor this year. And they've exceeded expectations. I mean, to me, the Rams are a lot like last year's Tampa Bay Ball Club. They bring in an older quarterback. They bring in a receiver who's really talented, but also very troubled. They bring in some older defensive guys who know what they're doing to go with the guys on the roster already who are very good. And there was a time we were all, especially like through weeks 12 through 15, where we were all like, well, Matt Stafford can't get it done. He's turning the ball over way too much. Just like how we all kind of forgot about Tampa Bay being good last year until they came out that bye. And I think there's a lot of connections there, and I wouldn't be surprised if they got the same results. So at this point, I'm taking the Rams, but there's a lot of great stories with the Super Bowl. It's going to be interesting to see how injury situations develop within the next couple weeks. So those are my takeaways from the championship games of the NFL. And overall, let's just give the NFL a round of applause, and I know they have no control over this. But after Wild Card Weekend, where all the matchups were just kind of mediocre, not really interesting, put you to sleep type games, we have gotten 6 games of high octane, pure intrigue. And I don't think that's going to end on the 13th of February. I think that game's going to be a lot of fun as well. So yeah, kudos to the NFL. You've got a great halftime show coming up. You've got a great championship game. You've got great divisional round games. And now you have a great big one to wrap it all up with. So that's my take on the NFL coverage for the week. And now I'd like to do something less gave me the green light to go ahead and do this. So we're going to talk about something that happened last Tuesday, almost a week from today, but still is a very hot button issue for sports fans, especially like me, which is the Baseball Hall of Fame. And for those of you who don't know what's going on, Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds, on their 10th year on the ballot, their final year on the ballot, were not elected. They got around 66% of the vote, each of them, and failed to get elected by the riders. They'll now go to the Veterans Committee ballot, where they have even less of a shot because of stigmas that players have about the steroid era. And I'm going to tell you why that this whole conversation about steroids is completely stupid, and we just need to let these guys in the Hall of Fame, whether or not we agree with the principle. Because I'd like to start a little bit of a list of some guys here. Now let's just see if you know who these guys are here. We're gonna have some fun. We've got come on, scroll down. We've got my thing's not scrolling. Gary Bennett, Larry Bigby. That's right, Larry Bigby. Howie Clark, Jack Cust, Brendan Donnelly, Ryan Franklin, Jerry Hairston Jr., Matt Herges. I'm sorry if I said that incorrectly. Let's see. Let's do a couple more here if I can find them. Tim Laker, Nuke Logan, Cody McKay, and Kent Merker. Now you're probably thinking, Matt, I know a little bit about baseball, and you just listed a bunch of random players. Now, the first thing I'd like to say is those are all guys who are also in the Mitchell Report for various reasons to do with performance-enhancing drugs, HGH, things like that. Now, here's a newsflash for you people. Those guys got named in the Mitchell Report, and none of those guys belong in the Hall of Fame. Some of those guys play like a year and then left. And you're thinking, why am I saying this? Because you still have to have, even if with steroids, you still have to have a certain amount of talent to be able to have a lasting career in Major League Baseball or in any sport. You can cheat on a test, but if you cheat on the dumbest kid in class, no offense, you're still going to get an F. You're not going to be a success. Or if you cheat on a C student, maybe you'll get a D. You still have to have a certain amount of talent to be able to be a success in the Major League Baseball pantheon, like Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Gary Sheffield, Manny Ramirez, Alex Rodriguez are. You still have to have a little bit of success and a little bit of talent. You can't just assume because someone took steroids that they're going to be an all-star player, and that's the only reason why they got any stats. When you have so many guys in the Mitchell Reports who have been accused of steroids that just don't. Secondly, I mean, we can debate about the legality of it at all. Drugs in baseball are nothing new. We had the Pittsburgh drug trials before this. We had Willie Mays saying he took some kind of red liquid before games before this. We had guys like Michael Jack Schmidt, one of the great Hall of Famers, the third baseman of the Philadelphia Phillies, saying, I took a couple drugs before the game. Drugs and baseball are nothing new. People will do whatever it takes to get a competitive edge. And if they can tweak the rules a little bit like you're saying Barry Bonds and those guys did, then that's what they did. That's what they did. And they still achieved, and they didn't end up like Ryan Franklin. No offense to Ryan Franklin, but he's just helping me prove my point here. So that's point number 2. Number 1, not all steroid users ended up being good. You still have to have talent. Number 2, drugs and baseball are nothing new. They've gone together for a while. And number 3, there's a little bit of hypocrisy involved with this. Because if you also look at guys who have been accused of taking STDs, that would have been bad. If you look at guys who have been accused of taking these drugs, Mike Piazza's on there. Jeff Bagwell, Craig Biggio, they're on there. And the guy they inducted, David Ortiz, we know he tested positive for something, and they're all in the Hall of Fame. So there's a little bit of a hypocrisy going on here, in my opinion. Just because those guys were a little bit nicer to the media and had a little bit more of a, oh, that's cool narrative going with them. That they induct these guys over guys like Barry Bonds, who's notoriously prickly, Roger Clemens, another prickly guy. I don't need to tell you guys about like Sammy Sosa and Jose Canseco and how prickly they can be at times, things like that. But that doesn't affect who they are on the field. So with those 3 points in mind, how do we rectify this situation? And this is something I've been preaching about for a very long time, which is that we need to have a committee. Like a veterans committee, but not really. Baseball's already done stuff like this before when they inducted African-American players who were not allowed to play in the major leagues. We need a committee like this, and they can be called the Steroid Era Committee. They can be called the Juiced Committee. I don't care what you call them. But we need to have a committee of guys who create a ballot with 20-ish names on it of 20 guys who are the best players of the steroid era. Bonds, Clemens, Sheffield, Manny Ramirez, Clemens, whoever you want, whoever you think. I'm sure they can come up with 20 guys who deserve to be considered for the Hall of Fame. You create a ballot, you get a bunch of younger writers and guys who played in that era. Like guys who played from 1996 to like 2005. And younger writers who remember that era quite well, who grew up in that era. The era that, frankly, let's be honest here, saved baseball the first time. It needs to be saved like every 20 years, but that's none of my business. They need to be in a room, and you need to elect half of those guys, maybe less, between 8 and 10 of those guys, to the Hall of Fame. The best of the best. And you don't even have to have an induction ceremony if you don't want to. You can just put their plaques up in the hall in a dark corner or something like that. But baseball, you can't choose to ignore that 20 years of your sport, where all the 30 for 30s are made from, where all the merchandise comes from, where all the players that like young parents tell their kids about came from. You can't ignore that didn't happen, and that's the way to do it. A committee full of younger guys who put 10 of the great guys from this era into the Hall of Fame. And like I said, you don't need to have a ceremony. You don't have to celebrate it. You can just release a statement acknowledging it. But that's how you do it. You got to get a committee, and you got to acknowledge the fact that things happen. Because for a lot of people, baseball was never more magical than when Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa were battling for the home run lead, and they may have had a little bit of HGH. For a lot of people, that is baseball, and that's, whether you want to admit it or not, that is a formative memory for a lot of baseball fans. And you're already going into another lockout situation, which is never good for the league. Never good for the league. And I know people love Big Papi and they love Derek Jeter and they're going to get to do speech. I think Derek Jeter did his speech. But you've inducted some lovable guys from like my time watching baseball, which does make me feel old. But you can't just ignore the elephant in the room. That the home run leader, a guy with 6 Cy Youngs, a few 500 home run hitters, aren't in the Hall of Fame. And you've got to find a way to rectify that. You can't just be like, oh, that never happened. Because that'll only make people want it more. Especially when the rules on drugs were so lax back then, and people cared about baseball. So that's my opinion for getting the Baseball Hall of Fame fixed. You do a committee, you elect 10 guys out of 20 from the steroid era. You use younger writers and guys who played against them, who may have some ill will, but not a lot. And you put those guys in, and you can have a ceremony, you can not, but just get their plaques in Cooperstown. That's what matters. And really, that's all I've got for my takeaways from this weekend. 2 big takeaways with a lot of multifaceted points, I know. But still, quite a bit of fun. It'll be interesting to see over the next week if Les and I can talk about Tom Brady retiring. As we speak right now, the new AP poll has been released. Auburn still number 1, Gonzaga number 2. Kentucky has jumped all the way to 3 after just drubbing Kansas in college basketball. That's something else, man. So we'll talk about that, I'm sure. We need to do another college basketball recap since we're heading into that, and we got a week before the Super Bowl. But yeah, those are my big takeaways for this edition of the Sports Less is More Sports Talk podcast. So, Baseball Hall of Fame, get it together. NFL, you've got it together. Enjoy your sporting week, friends. Have a great one.